thanks everyone for joining us today. Sun's out, so a bit of fresh air is probably another place to be. So grateful for your time. Myself, Stephen and Peter and Ian's in the background doing all the clever technical stuff for us, but joining you today. We will make some introductions in a second, but I think what we wanted to start off by doing is just introducing really what BEST is, what is it, the why, but also what we're here to talk about a little bit today, and also what comes next, and just a little bit about the journey so far and what we're looking to do going forward and who that will be. So I think in terms of obviously introductions, so first of all, what is BEST? So BEST is a training product that myself and Stephen have talked about for many years. I can't take the credit for it. I think it was a conversation that Stephen started some years ago. And we both acknowledge that having done the historic building surveying training, and Stephen, and he'll tell you a little bit about himself in a second, we just felt there was a real need to not just put something back in the industry, but also just to champion all things heritage. I think there's a lot of great training content out there, but wouldn't it be great to bring that all together in one place, make it digital, make it accessible? And, built environment, skills and training was born from that kind of conversation. So it's been a long time in the planning. I think what we're looking to do is to work with lots of fantastic experts. Peter is one of those that's with us today, but we've had some brilliant conversations with some fantastic organisations and experts within this industry. So as much as, Stephen and myself and Peter and Ian are driving things forward today, I think there's a lot more to come on the horizon with some brilliant minds out there. So we're quite excited by that. Our goal, quite simply, it's to create a credential specialist heritage property, all things heritage really in terms of traditional buildings. If you work within that sector as a property professional, we're aiming to get to speak to you, to talk to you about this training. So module 1, I think we launched back in October, so it's quite new. Most people won't have heard of what BEST is or what we are, or certainly who we are, but we launched around October time. Module 1's out there. I think we're just by way of a thank you, I'd put a thank you out to Saventrix. The team over there sponsored module 1, just to point out here that for those that haven't seen it, please do check it out. It's there for anyone that wants access to it. As part of that, there's access to something called Saventrix, which might not mean a lot to anyone today, but they've very kindly agreed to set up free accounts with them. There's lots of stuff on there. We're not here to talk about Saventrix today. They're just a very kind supporter of what me and Stephen are looking to do. But yeah, module 1's live. That's more, think of that module as a bit of a foundation into all things heritage and traditional buildings. It's setting the scene for what's to come next. Today is really to set the scene about module 2. But yeah, like I say, it's a free, no obligation with Saventrix, and you'll get access to Stephen's heritage community as well, which is a fantastic resource. Anyone that joins us for the module 1 and onwards will have access to that for 12 months, access to Saventrix for 12 months, which is very quickly report writing, all in one sort of CRM type platform software system. But yeah, so let's jump into introductions. So enough about the past. Let's talk about who's here today. So the panel, obviously the ugly one on the left, that's me. So I'm sort of hosting and just keeping everyone to the clock and making sure we don't run too far ahead. But I'm Ian Bullock. I'm a chartered surveyor. I run an independent SME practice in the Midlands. Established in 1988. We're a team of 9 surveyors, just solely based in the central region. Surveying is all I've ever done. Residential property is all I've ever known, of which a good chunk of that time has been working with and in traditional buildings. In terms of obviously today with me, we've got Stephen, who doesn't probably need much introduction, but will do so anyway. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about yourself first of all, Stephen, and we'll introduce Peter after.
Well, just briefly, for those who may not know me, I won't assume anything. I actually started life as a general practice surveyor. In fact, my early years when I first left school into surveying was dealing with commercial estate agency and property management. And once I qualified, which was in the early 80s, yes, I am that old, I then got interested in conservation and historic buildings, and through the 80s and into the 90s then developed that. And I suppose I became known in the conservation world in the 90s for what I did there. Over the years, I did have my own practice in the 90s, but then merged with a company called Whitworth, who are a firm of architects. So I was in a mixed practice from 2000 until my retirement from there a couple of years ago. And I've worked on a wide range of buildings. So yes, a lot of it was residential, but I've also surveyed a Neolithic flint mine, as well as castles. And I've been involved with churches and other bits and pieces over the years as well. So I suppose my range of building type has been, I'm one of those that doesn't believe in this. It's a residential building. It's a this, but no, it's a building. The use may be residential. It's a building. And that's the way I approach things. But anyway, that's me. Yeah, I'll shut up now and let Peter introduce himself, because he's the one that we need to listen to today.
That sounds dangerous. I hope you can hear me all right. I've had to do an emergency Wi-Fi connect to hotspot my phone, hence I dropped out earlier. Right, okay. Well, I didn't start off in construction at all. So the first part of my career was retail and catering led. And then I became a stock control analyst for a large retailer, which probably has pretty much nothing to do with surveying. But I stumbled into the damp and timber world about just over 25 years ago, when a friend of mine had suggested I should train to be a surveyor for doing damp and timber, train up at the PCA, and started doing that. And then realised, because I didn't actually have a clue about buildings, there was no way that I should be studying that and trying to tell people what to do when I didn't understand basic structures. So instead of carrying on with that, I went on the tools, got my hands dirty and got a taste for it. So I ended up doing all these treatments. And then I discovered this thing called lime. Then I started getting interested in hob and started just, contracting, doing traditional building work, structural reinforcement, and very much not damp proofing, but dealing with things in a natural way. And then when I got a bit too creaky, because I'm a bit arthritic and couldn't really work on the tools much any longer, a local firm that wanted somebody that was conservation based and had also done all their training for the CSRT and things like that, they wanted to bring somebody on as a surveyor. So that's where I ended up at sort of moving a damp and timber company much more towards the heritage side of things. Unfortunately, due to COVID, they packed up. So I found myself in my mid-50s being facing self-employment again. So I started up Surveying My House Limited. So surveys houses, funnily enough. So so very much in the damp and timber specialities, but also more general. And just one thing led to another. I ended up being a trainer up at the PCA for damp and timber technicians and also MBQ students as well, which is why I'm talking to you from Blackpool today rather than the Isle of Wight. I've got students I've been with this morning. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea, summary of what led me here, if that's of any help to anybody.
Yeah, thank you for that, chaps. Both have an intimate working understanding, knowledge of traditional buildings. What these two chaps don't know about buildings in general isn't worth knowing, really. So we're very lucky to have you both in that regard. And so shall we jump into a little bit more about what's to come? So obviously we're not going to get through an awful lot in an hour today. There's so much to talk about within the world of conservation and heritage and all things traditional buildings. I'm also mindful that majority of people that are here today, what's really amazing about the response we've had is all different walks of life. You know, I live in that little world or that little bubble of residential building surveys, pre-purchase surveys, but that's a very small representation of what we've got on the call today. So with that in mind, this is a course that we've designed that's accessible for all, is largely digital, but we are looking to put a lot of in-person events with some fantastic locations and museums and things like getting hands-on with hotline mixes and what have you for those that really want to get into more detail. But I thought it was just useful just to do a little bit about, you know, what is it we're actually looking at today and talking about, and where are we? So I'll put my glasses on because even I can't read that slide in as much detail. But I think this is more just as a placeholder, just to show you a little bit about, like I said, section 1. We figured it's a world which I understand quite well. It's a world that Stephen and I have grown up in quite a lot and have a lot of experience in the pre-purchase sector. It is something that sets a foundation for what's to come. So think of this as really kind of an introduction, a taster session into the real technical analysis and the real sort of content that people will get quite excited about and spend hours sort of, you know, going down those rabbit holes. But I think it gives us a good grounding into where we want to go with this course. So section 1, module 1, as I said, it's very much a taster session into it. It's about 15 hours of content. So for those that are interested, haven't checked it out, please do so. As I say, as part of that, you know, you've got access to Saventrix and Stephen's conservation community, where there's a lot of resource on there as well. There's Q&As monthly, there's newsletters, there's resources, and it's a forum and a community to develop. So one of the things that, if someone said to me, what is best? Yes, it's a training course, but what it is more than that is actually a community. It's a heritage community. Stephen and I passionately believe that it's a lonely old world out there, in whatever sector you work in. It's great to bring people together. So hence why we want to do in-person things. Hence why, you know, we want to do digital, because it is busy. You will need access to it flexibly and be able to dip in and out. So there's lots more we have in plan. There's a little bit of a taster on here about, you know, sections 2 through to 7. There's a lot that we have to cover off. Now, I'm not here to sort of go into a lot of detail about all these, because we just wanted to tease a little bit about what we're doing in module 2 and what Peter's very kindly, you know, helped us with as part of case study work, which we'll get onto in a second. But yeah, so there's lots of content there. As I say, it's all on the website, so please do have a look at that. But as I say, it covers off a range of things for preparing for inspections, data capture, reflection and diagnostics, client care and management, you know, that pre and post client care discussions that you'll have around your data capture, inspection and management of a building. Report writing, you know, we've touched a little bit about on that. We are going to do in more detail, you know, a whole section on, or breakout section on report writing. But what we are mindful of is everything we talk about, whether it's today or in future, probably will touch on report writing or complaints handling, or, you know, there's a lot of areas that will cross over on that. So I think there's a lot of snippets that are covered off in that. So so that's module 1.
Can I just hop in on there and interject at that point? I think, as Ian said, this is, if you like, the foundational stuff. And so we would encourage anyone that's interested to do this. Going back to part of what we're doing and why we're doing it, we have been asked, and I think one of the questions today was, are you going to go down the route of a formal qualification? And I think the answer to that is that's not our intention. And the reason for that is we feel that it's important that we create something that is accessible to as many people as possible, for them to do at their own time, at their own pace, whenever they want to. And that's why we're creating these modules as, if you like, CPD level type stuff, because we feel that's the way to go. If someone wants to become a specialist and go on into conservation, that's fine. But there will be many of you that may say, I don't want to be a specialist, but I do want that additional knowledge. And that's what we're trying to do here. On the in-face sessions, I'm in discussion, and we've more or less agreed to, as the first one, a Lime Day. It'll be just outside Newmarket. So it won't be accessible to everyone, but those in the Midlands, East, South might be able to access it. We're closing that deal hopefully fairly soon. and we've got plans to have face-to-face sessions. And the one thing that I found in discussion recently is that so many people, and I don't know how many of you on this webinar today find that you're on your own so often, and it's very difficult to talk to other people. So in these face-to-face sessions, we're actually planning not a lot other than the fact we're going to be there, and we're going to say we're going to hold a face-to-face. It's going to be somewhere interesting, somewhere you can go and learn something, but it's more a matter of just come and have a chat to each other, to us, and just learn from each other and share experiences, because I don't think there's enough of that happening, and I think there is a desire for that. And so as part of the face-to-face, we will include some CPD element of it, but a big part of the face-to-face is just getting to know each other and learning from each other. So sorry, Ian, I've interrupted you there, but hopefully that explains a little bit more about what we've got in mind for the future anyway.
Yeah, no, very much so. Very much so. No, thank you very much. So yeah, let's press on a little bit. Talking about module 2 then. So today is to introduce module 2, and it's all about moisture in buildings. But what we do acknowledge is that there's a lot of, it's a far-reaching subject. There's lots of components, lots of building blocks to moisture in general. And I don't know whether, Stephen, it's worth spending a little bit of time either with yourself and or Peter's input here, but to break down a little bit how we plan to cover some of that off. So for instance, we've mentioned here, do we sort of segregate into timber defects and rot infestation, condensation as another example. And we've put a few examples in there of things like flooding, condensation salts, retrofit issues. The list could go on and on and on. And whilst we have these as a couple of examples, I think what we want to stress here is that we picked moisture first intentionally. It's the biggest subject area, perhaps the most complex area on a technical level, for a very valid reason, and that's that we can segregate and break down some of these components into that area. So one of the things that we'll touch on in a second is the case study approach that we've done very recently with Peter's very kind support on that, which is, for me, I think it's probably a bit of a first. I've not come across training delivered this way before, where it's hands-on, real world, client faced in an actual real world situation. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So I think where we can, a lot of this content would be practically focused in that sense. But yeah, so I think the what's to come, lots. Again, follow the website, follow the socials, because we will be posting more out on that in due course. But don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Stephen, but I'd probably just wanted to point that out, really.
Well, yeah, let's just think a little bit more about these modules and how they came to be, because I think when we sat down and we said let's do a module looking at moisture in buildings, and then we started to realize that it was a vast subject area. So you talk about moisture, and then you start thinking, well, the present day problem that comes up more often than anything else perhaps is condensation. So that's a specific aspect to moisture in buildings. But then, especially with the weather we've just been having, you've got flooding. And then Peter, when he looked through my sort of draft planning, he said, oh, you sort of shoved salts in, but you've not really done salts in any meaningful way. And I thought, oh, he's right, actually. So I thought it's important that we talk about salts, because again, that leads to so much misdiagnosis, because we just don't understand that enough. And of course, the other big issue is retrofit, and the problems that are now coming to light through retrofit, and what are the issues that raises, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we've got the whole world of timber, decay, the rots, the insect infestations, and the so on and so forth. And then at the end of all this is, how do you report it? How do you advise clients? So there was so much that we wanted to try and fit in. So the first of these 3 modules is just looking at moisture. Where does it come from? How does it get into buildings? How do we investigate it? And we're looking at different methods of investigation, non-invasive and invasive, what you can and can't do with the equipment we've got available, and so on and so forth. So that's what we're looking at. And we were very fortunate in having a real case come to us, that I was able to ask the client, do you mind us filming this? And they said, yeah, that's fine. Very kindly agreed to that. So we've been able to film a real life one. In fact, I've got another one definite that wants us to do some filming, that I'm in discussions with Peter about another one, something slightly different again. And I think Ian's going to do a non-invasive bit of content with another surveyor up north. So we've got plans for content that actually involves looking at really what do you actually do on site, and perhaps looking at some of the things we don't do on site or what would be inappropriate. Peter, do you want to develop that and talk about that side of it? Perhaps based on the inspection we did recently.
Well, insofar as going through the actual inspection and how we started it and how we got to opening up, is that more appropriate?
Yeah. Let's just briefly talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully, I'll get this right. So we went to this property and there were various symptoms going on. And behind where the chap to the left of Stephen in the photograph there sitting, well, all the walls have been damp proofed at some stage, and there was problems on the wall behind him. There was problems on the floor beneath him, painted floorboards. There's some, what I like to refer to as rust halos, but rusty nails, quite obviously, and more noticeable near to the wall. And I remember having the discussion beforehand that the floorboards were allegedly going to be quite an easy lift, which never assume anything.
It took us ages, didn't it?
Yeah. I just got onto the ferry. All I could say to that, it was a very, very close call on that one. So we went through a logical process of, okay, what's happened? What's going on the outside? What's going on the inside? What could it be? What's the necessary steps? What's the subject property? How long has it been lived in by the current occupants? What's their experiences, etc., etc. So getting a really rounded idea before we even started about occupancy, length of time, when treatments were carried out, and all those sort of things. And then it was a case of, well, let's examine the evidence using things like a thermal imaging camera and an electronic handheld moisture meter. What's that telling us? What can we rely on? What can we assume from that? Should we assume anything? And does that lead us to follow a trail in a little bit more invasive way? Well, yes, it did. So it involved potentially easy, but I managed to make it a lot harder job of trying to take the floorboards up, because we followed the trail using the pins on the moisture meter. Then we used some deep probe moisture meters, so we get deep probes to the moisture meter, so we could actually measure or estimate the moisture content in the floor framing timbers, the joist beneath where we thought the problem was. And funnily enough, it looked that, how it looked, the data bore that there was more moisture where the nails were looking rusty and less moisture where they weren't. And so we managed to find out, well, this is the area we're going to dive into, and in we dove. And I found various interesting things beneath the floor. So it's interesting how we could make let these instruments tell us what might be underneath there, get some good ideas of what was there, and then open it up and go, oh, actually, there's some stuff that we thought was going on, and then a few added bonuses as well on top of that. So it ended up with taking some samples, and we ended up taking some destructive samples. I would say possibly, if you can see the window, the corner of the window by where Stephen's right shoulder is in the picture, it was beneath that point. And we just took a a small strip of plaster off to take some samples out of the mortar beds so we could send them off to the lab, results pending. And we couldn't do a full moisture profile on that, but I think the thing that's important to note on that is sometimes you can only get limited permission, and if you've got limited permission, you are probably going to get a limited result, but at least you can get something, and maybe that might lead to permissions to carry out more tests. So it's not necessarily something that you have to do all in one go.
And I think
so hopefully that gives a bit of an idea.
Yeah, I think it also and for those who sign up and actually watch the full module and see the actual video content of us live trying to work it out and see what's going on, you'll see that sometimes you get readings from whatever tools you. Let's face it, the tools are merely a tool. You hear some people say you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't use this, or you should use that, and what have you. It's a tool. And it's how you use it and how you interpret it that is the important thing here. And so what this did show us is the fact that you can get a wrong diagnosis if you're not careful. We could have easily just taken a few readings and said, oh, it must be X, and we'd have been very wrong. So that's the sort of lessons to be learned from here. So did you want to add anything else, Peter? Ian, do you want to say anything?
No, I just think the point I would want to make before we very quickly move on, in terms of obviously what we're context for this. So one of the things that we are finalising in terms of the actual content that you'll see in due course is a real world scenario where, as you can see on that previous slide, both Peter and Stephen were in a real world example. And I suppose in my world, it would be, we've been out to do a building inspection, we've picked up on some problems, and at that point, it's very often, a non-invasive, non-intrusive surface level inspection. We've filled in the what next, what happens next. And so on that content, which you'll see, we haven't got time to go through it all today, but it'll give you an insight into the what next in a much more detailed environment that's a real world scenario. So things like the toolkit and how it was done, what was done, and the readings and that profiling, it's all covered off in there. I think we just wanted to touch on that a little bit. In terms of the, moving forward to things like the joint practice statement. So I think we just wanted to pause a little bit, talk a little bit about the context here and that framework for and the benchmark against our training program. So again, this is a world that everyone will be familiar with, the JPS, but I don't know if there's anything you want to sort of acknowledge here, Stephen, other than to say this is what we're benchmarking. Part of the process, obviously, is against JPS and other standards too. But yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the important thing to realise about the JPS is it's a starting point. It sets out some general principles about investigating moisture in buildings. And what we're trying to do is to put some flesh on the bones that is the JPS. Because the JPS, as I say, is a starting point. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it gives us a skeleton, if you like, on which we can then flesh out. And I believe, Peter, in your training, you refer back to this all the time, don't you?
Yeah, even for the technicians that come in, it's not even the surveyors, the technicians that come in. The final slide, or the penultimate slide on the day one of the dampness is the JPS, and so we encourage people to walk away with JPS even as a technician. So yeah, people get training on it. It's just basic good common sense that should be in place anyway, isn't it? But it helps guide people to what common sense looks like. That's my opinion anyway, so hopefully you'll agree.
Yeah, and I think part of module 1 that we've done is the foundational stuff about understanding the building, and that's what JPS talks about, doesn't it? It says that part of the first aspect is to just understand what the building is, its construction, etc., etc. And in module 1 we've addressed that, and we've hopefully dealt with that. Module 2 then takes us on to the next stage, which is the investigation and so on and so forth, which is what we've obviously just spoken about. So yeah, that's that. But then I suppose that leads us on to the report writing, doesn't it, Ian?
Yeah, so again, we're kind of million and one subjects, very little time, and this is kind of just trying to touch on lots of things in a short space of time, rightly or wrongly. But I think one of the things that we will frame part of our discussions on in the context of moisture will be report writing. Now, obviously, again, putting my hat on, and forgive me because that's all I know, is pre-purchase building survey content, which is very often putting a few thoughts together here. If you think of the complaints world, B2C sort of consumer market of who you're acting for, if you think about insurance and complaints handling industry, if you think about customer service, if you think about all of the guidance there, and in my world, it's RICS practice notes and the home survey standard. There are lots of others in different arenas. And of course, that all comes back to, you found a moisture problem, how do we report it? So I think what we wanted to do was to, warts and all, at some point cover off and tackle, well, it's one thing to diagnose moisture, and it's another thing to understand what's the causation factors. But when it comes to remedy, cost, implications, diminution value, limitations, assumptions, caveats, the list goes on. I think what we would like to do, and the reason for this sort of placeholder, is to say two things really. One, we will be covering this off in an awful lot more detail. And whilst we can't give you a predefined solution to a problem, in other words, put this form of words into the output and there's your answer, what we can do with the benefit of Stephen's experience, my experience, and Peter's experience is put together a form of words as a start point, as a basis that can be customized to the situational awareness that actually will help you to deliver that information in a sympathetic, client-friendly way that's not going to compromise your integrity, your professional opinion, your qualifications, and it will help you with regards to assumptions. I think it's a big area in itself. We're not here to talk about, could have a whole session on report writing, but I think it's important to say that this will be covered off. The other part to this is, again, there's a screenshot there of it. As part of module 1, we touched a little bit about report writing. We mentioned earlier on, for anyone that subscribes to module 1, you have access to something called Subventrix. Well, what that will be, part of its platform is a report writing part of the process. Now, what me and Stephen have also talked about is not just developing a framework for a form of words or scenario-based words, but also things like templates, report templates. You know, one of the things that we also want to cover off, and we've talked about and planned out, is things like specific defect reports. Well, this all comes back to how we deliver that information. So as much as we can talk about data capture, intrusive versus non-intrusive, diagnostics, it all leads back to report writing in the end. And I think there's a lot of work we can do there. Stephen and I have both acted as expert witness for many years, and we've seen the extremes of fantastic, brilliant reports right through to that's not too great. What we're really trying to do in a non-patronising, non-assuming kind of way that's not specific to any given role is to try and show something different, perhaps share a little bit about what's worked for us. So yeah, I think report writing was just something I wanted to touch on there. I don't know if you'd add anything more than that, Stephen, but it was just really just to say, look, that's coming to as part of moisture.
Yeah, I think no, totally endorse everything you've said. With regard to forms of words, I've always balks a little bit when people talk about standard paragraphs. I personally have never liked the idea of standard paragraphs. However, I do recognize that there are scenarios where people do need some assistance in what sort of form of words could they use in a given situation. And so one of the bits of content, it won't be video content, it'll be a separate document that we upload for anyone taking the going through the module. There will be a document with suggested phraseologies for given situations that they can adapt and adopt according to their own. I mean, I would never recommend that you just use them blindly without thinking about it. You've got to think about how appropriate it is for your situation, etc., etc. But we will be giving you some assistance, and Peter's been helping us with that and is helping, has given some input in on that. The other thing I think we would like to do, and this is perhaps a little bit looking to the future, is I think I'm personally aware, because I'll be quite honest, I'm slightly dyslexic, and whilst I have no problem necessarily reading reports, I am very aware that a lot of people do have trouble reading lots of words in a dirty, great, thick document. And so one of the things we're going to actively look at is, are there other ways to deliver this information? Are there other ways to advise clients, maybe video and audio reports and things like that? So we're going to be exploring that and talking about that in future, because I think we have to acknowledge that that's the way forward. And of course, the one thing we can't avoid in all this discussion is the whole question of AI and where does that sit in it. So although our training is focused on dealing with historic buildings, old traditional buildings, what we're also doing is looking to the future, because I think that conservation is about the future. It's not actually about the past. Conservation is about the future, making sure these buildings have a future life. And because of that, we need to be completely up to date with modern technology and all that's going on, because that is the future. And that's what we'll be looking at. And of course, that leads us on to the final slide that we've got for now. And that's the whole issue of complaints. So Ian, do you want to pick up on this?
Yeah, no, sure. Look, I think, again, a bit like the report writing, I think at the risk of trying to go down lots of different rabbit holes and end up saying, well, I attended today to talk about moisture, why are we talking about complaints? Why are we talking about report writing? I think in all these things, we just wanted to bring it all back to, let's assess a building component, let's assess a defect, and let's work it back through from source to output, and what problems and what challenges sit around that. So obviously, we've got the practical side of the job, which is the data capture, the inspection, the consideration, the analysis, the profiling and mapping. Then we move on to report writing and how we frame those words, those assumptions, those caveats, those further investigations, those advisories, those recommendations, those costings, and so on. But then we move on to the post completion. And unfortunately, we're all human. Obviously, we can talk about AI. So there's a conversation piece there. We won't go into AI because I can talk about it all day. But I think the point there is we are all human. Mistakes sometimes happen. What we'd like to try and do, particularly around the context of moisture in traditional buildings, whether it's a church, a house, it really doesn't matter, as Stephen said before, a building is a building. It's just the change of use or current use. I think we want to try and reduce that level of risk, because let's be honest, it's all about risk in terms of what we're talking about here. And again, I talk about expert witness. There are some people on this session that are what I consider to be experts in this field, way better than me. Marion Ellis, for one, I've seen you somewhere. I can't see on the screen, but I know you're here somewhere. But there's some fantastic resources out there. But I think what we're really referring to is, let's try and talk about how we mitigate risks in reporting on moisture, and how we can reduce that opportunity for a claim. Because in the world that I live in, unfortunately, wearing an expert witness hat, things go wrong. So we want to sort of frame that into the written words we talked about before. It'll be factored into that. We want to factor that into how we deal with assumptions and caveats, because I think that's really important. If you look at what goes wrong, very often it's because you couldn't see, you couldn't access, and it's how you frame that to the client and how you dealt with it. So there's lots we can do there, and we'll pick up on questions in a minute. But one of the things that's popped into the chat is about certain authors and experts in this industry. Absolutely. I mean, Peter's very kindly joined us to collaborate on one of the case studies. There are behind the scenes, we can't disclose names because unfortunately we've not got to that point where we've signed the deal and happy to sort of share that information, because it wouldn't be fair. But there are some brilliant people that have a lot of information to share. This isn't about me and Stephen or Peter or Ian. This is about bringing that knowledge to the fore in a accessible format that can apply to any given situation in a traditional building. It's not just about complaints, not just about report writing. So one of the questions that was asked, for example, have we worked with Michael Parrott? Yeah, I mean, look, there's lots of people. So again, I'm not going to name drop too many people, but you can assume we've thought about it, talked to, and engaged with anyone that's relevant in the industry that we deem to be, fantastic value add to this. So yeah, I think that covers off complaints. We're not going to do that in isolation. We will pull people in. Again, I won't name drop, but there'll be some brilliant people that can share some experiences and work with us on this. So there's a lot to get through. We just wanted to give a sense check, an introduction, a grounding into what Module 2 might look like as we evolve. There's a lot to get through. We've made some great progress. We've made a great start with Peter's help on some real world case study analysis, because again, it's great reading all the books in the world, but what you really need is practical, applicable, real world scenario advice to run through. And those scenarios, I want to do more of that because it really helps, to bring it all together. So in answer to that kind of question, have we worked with or are we doing anything in that field? I think watch this space is all I would say on that. So yeah, lots more too. There's some questions in the chat. So before we sort of close things down, we've run over 5 minutes, my fault, sorry. But we've got a little bit of time, 15 minutes or so to cover off Q&A. We've had, at the last count, something like 50 odd questions fired at us in advance of today. We're not going to get a chance to cover all of those off. Some of them are quite technical and detailed. There's some in the chat, let's run through those because that's only fair that we try and cover off as much of that as we can. All we're saying is if we don't cover off your question for today, just know that it is documented, it is in plan, and it is something we will factor into future subsequent sessions. It'll perhaps be covered off in a newsletter, in the community that Stephen has, be conservation community, or in upcoming content. So we will get to it all, I promise. So I'm just going to run through and steer the questions to you guys. So there's a question there from John. So I'm going to fire this one at Peter, but again, feel free to chip in on Stephen. But what instruments were you using? I'm assuming that was in the case study where floorboards were exposed, moisture readings were being taken. Can you just share with everyone what equipment you were using on that day?
Okay. Did use thermal imaging camera, nothing particularly flash, not a £50,000 one, but just to see if we could get any information off of that, electronic handheld moisture meter with, most importantly, additional probes to get beneath the surface of things. So that gives you an opportunity if you've got insulated probes to go beneath the surface rather than get sort of erroneous readings or, perhaps you haven't got the depth. So they're really, I don't think enough people have them. I'm a big fan of those. Apart from that, did use the speedy moisture meter, the calcium carbide, more for a demonstration purpose to say, look, this is a percentage reading. This is rather than a moisture meter qualitative reading. So you're actually getting a quantitative reading saying we've got 10% by weight, for example, rather than the meters bleeping and giving a feedback of whatever it does, because you have to interpret those readings. But you can take an actual reading on the speedy. And as far as outside is concerned, I did use a Wola smoke generator pen. It's a really great bit of kit. That was not so much investigation, but more a demonstration that how you could easily see whether an air vent was connected to the subfloor void or not. Did also have a little handheld boroscope. It's actually the one I use is just cheap. It's one that you can use for cars and stick it through injector holes and look back up at the bore. And only priced at about £100. An incredibly useful bit of kit that it doesn't, you're not having a very expensive bit of kit that you can damage, and therefore it's a really great bit of toolbox. So enhancement for surveyors in general, because at around about £100 you can start looking through air bricks, because there's very much a case of, well, just because an air brick's there doesn't mean to say it's doing anything apart from looking pretty. So if you can put a boroscope through, the reason why I used that smoke tester was we had a look through with the boroscope and found that we could get through to the subfloor timbers quite easily on the left-hand side wall of the property. But there's a little return of the centre room, say roughly where Stephen was sitting in that photograph where we took the samples out of the wall. There was that little return there where there was an air brick. You had a small section of rear elevation wall of the centre room, I would describe it in a house, and couldn't actually get the boroscope through there. And because I couldn't get the boroscope through there, that's why I used a little smoke test, because if you can see that that's actually going through, even if you can't see it, you've got some kind of indication that there's some kind of airflow there. So it's useful information. It's not calibrated, but to say it has its uses, and it was very good demonstrating that to the client.
Fab. Stephen, anything you'd add to that, or that sound quite comprehensive answer today, but...
No, I think that's great. I mean, Peter, you also had some other bits of kit, didn't you? Have measuring humidity and things like that. I'm not sure we relied on it a lot, but you had it there, and we did use it to look at.
Yeah, I should mention that. You're quite right. I wasn't really concentrating on that. Actually, in the photo, I think you can see there's a couple of thermohygrometers on the windowsill, perhaps. But if anybody does look at that, they are lying around there, just trying to get some readings to get internal relative humidity and also later on external relative humidity and temperature. What I did have with me, but I didn't use, was hood and anemometer calibrated, so we could determine airflow of any of the mechanical extraction facilities in the wet rooms. But it turned out that, well, there wasn't an awful lot there anyway. There was one unit, but it wasn't worth going through the measuring, because effectively a re-specification has been submitted that wouldn't involve the unit that was there anyway. So we were pushed for time. It didn't seem to have any value to measure the airflow, only if you're going to retain a unit, or there was some question about whether you're borderline on a ventilation system, would you start using that? So it wasn't deployed.
Okay, let's move on to some questions, and I'm gonna start with one that I think is quite common. Some common misconception of what rising damp is and misdiagnosis issues, but allied to that is, does rising damp exist, or is it really a myth? And if there is no DPC in a wall, such as with many historic buildings, well, if there's rising damp, what do you do about it? So, Peter, let's throw those at you.
Oh, well, this is going to be controversial, isn't it? Well, first of all, I'd say, is the dampness actually a problem? I'm going to quickly think about a building that was, I remember doing a survey on a building that was built in 1615, apparently, or around that era, grade 2 listed in south of Isle of Wight, Chale, if anybody knows it. And I did that damp survey using a notepad and a camera. So nothing in the way of measurement whatsoever. And it didn't matter. There was no damp proof course in it. But you know what? Who cares? And that might be a bit controversial, but it was an exposed stone surface inside. The skirting boards, presumably, retrofitted, were in fact masonry. They were run molded Roman cement, so they were never going to get affected by the moisture. There was cement pointing on the outside. There was high ground level. There was rubbishy gutters, and there was a leaking outside tap. And everywhere where there was obviously dampness, there was obviously a problem that corresponded with it outside. And then, even if that remained damp, if you've got exposed stone surfaces and it's perfectly okay and there's no timber in contact with it, who cares? It wasn't causing any problem. There wasn't any real decorative spoiling, apart from the areas where the gutter was leaking and the tap was leaking. So, sometimes it just doesn't really matter. It's, as some other people have said, it's unwanted moisture in buildings. And if it's not particularly bad, what's the problem? It's a case of what you're going to do about it. And sometimes it's like, well, I think SPAB referred to it as conscious inaction, that sometimes you just need to know it's there. And maybe in the next 10 years, you might be taking the cement pointing out and putting lime in there if the stonework's not suffering too badly, and the budget's there. Well, it might be, you might respond differently client to client, mightn't you? There are alternatives, of course. Do you put in a physical DPC? Is it worth it? Do you inject a DPC in there? I mean, even SPAB recommend that it is possible to do that in certain circumstances, but it's really a last resort. So there's a whole load of different things you could do, but you've got to respond to the client, the building, where the building's set, what anybody wants to achieve, what the legislation is, what the actual real problems are rather than perceived problems. So Maybe a bit of a woolly
Yeah,
answer, but in fact,
yeah.
it is a woolly answer because you can't define every building's different, every person's different.
Well, I think I totally agree with you. I mean, if you say does damp rise up a wall from a scientific point of view? Probably in certain situations. How high? Who knows? There are lots of things you could say about that. I personally would love us to get away from the term rising damp full stop, because I think it's so abused and misused as a term. Um, what we're talking about is damp appearing, or the appearance of damp or staining or something, some evidence of a problem at low level. The real question is what is happening, exactly as you just said, Peter, is what is really happening and what do we really need to do about it. And we have a whole, if you like to use an artist's analogy, a whole rainbow of colors on our palette here, and we should be aware of all possible solutions, but make sure that we tailor the solution to the given situation, to that particular building and that particular client, etc., 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 and not be blinkered into thinking there is only one type of solution to any particular problem. And I think that's what we're trying to get across in this training, is to open eyes to all the possibilities that are out there, so that it equips those undertaking this training so that they can think through the issues and come up with their own solutions as in that given situation. Does that make some sense? I hope it does anyway.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I've been having a look at some of the comments flashing. I mean, it's difficult because I only see them for the second that they flash up. But I realised that some stuff I didn't really cover. People mentioning about salts, and so rising dampness, if we want to use that term, and let's just use it for the moment, that it's very easy to prove or disprove by carrying out gravimetric testing. And for those that don't know what gravimetric testing is, effectively taking samples and determining through a process of drying out for, in part of the testing, you dry out and find out the total moisture content by weight, and you also allow the samples to be suspended in a relative humidity of 75% for a specific period, and then measuring to see what the air dry moisture content is as in hygroscopic, and then also look at the particular salts in that. So it tells you what's going on if you have gravimetric testing, but of course it's destructive, and therefore you can tell whether you've got rising dampness or not. And obviously it's unfortunately more frequently treated than it tends to present, which is why I'm a great fan of gravimetric testing. But that will determine what you've got. Have you got salts? Do you need to make allowances for the fact that you've got salts in particular concentrations, or is it an acceptable risk? So all of that can be answered if you go through the destructive testing process. Hopefully that clarifies things a little more.
Yeah. That's great. One of the questions we have been asked in advance is, how do you report when you're unsure of the cause? And I think as surveyors, in particular, we tend to think we've always got to provide an answer. And sometimes that results in something being reported that isn't strictly correct. That this brings us back to the complaints and the report writing side of it. I think I've always said to clients, look, when you've got a damp problem in particular, they're not always easy to work out. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you get to a property, you can see it almost immediately what's really going on, and you can work it out. Sometimes it's more difficult. And I often say it's a staged process, because it's sensible to deal with the obvious bits and pieces. If you've got high ground level, leaking gutters, cement render down to the ground, bridging over damp-proof courses, or just bridging to ground, deal with those things first and then see what happens. Take your time. There's no need to go straight into finding an absolute solution from day one at the outset. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being unsure, at least at first. because I think there are ways you can guide a client. I think uncertainty is part of being a human being. We're not always sure of everything. It's how you then advise a client. And I think what is important, and what I think we'll come to in the report writing side, is even if you're not certain of what's going on, you need to provide the client with a roadmap of what they should be looking at, what needs to be investigated next, to be able to then answer the questions. And I think roadmap is the term Peter and I were using on site the other day with the client, weren't we? We were saying you need a roadmap as to solve these issues, deal with things one bit at a time. Because there, the client was saying, I can't do everything at once. So therefore, I actually need to know, what should I do now? What should I be thinking of for the next 6 months, a year? What might I need to think about in the longer term? And I think that's how we need to start thinking, is not necessarily always worrying about providing an absolute solution there, here and now, on day one. So that would be my answer to that. Now, Peter, we've got some more questions here about plasters. Gypsum plaster in particular. I mean, gypsum plaster, is it vapor permeable?
Yes.
Should it always be removed?
Well, it depends if it's causing a problem. I think can be an obsession, can't there, with that. I cringe when I see gypsum plasters used on a building that it shouldn't have been. Full stop. I'm not a fan of gypsum plasters. That being said, when the cure is worse than disease, then you've got to start thinking about whether you're implementing a treatment. So when we talk about the cement render or the cement pointing or the gypsum plaster, all in the same category, inappropriate materials for that type of building, you can't wind back time. And if you start, I think we possibly talked about a thoroughly bad job. So with cement repointing, I know it's not gypsum plaster, but if somebody's really deeply raked out the mortar beds, done a beautiful preparation job, and then shoved 3-in-1 sand and cement in there, so it's rock hard, the damage that you might do taking that out may be more than the damage of leaving it in for a while. Who knows? And so equally with gypsum plaster, it's a case of, maybe the client can tolerate it, maybe they haven't got the money, maybe that the taking off of removal of the gypsum plaster is too much. So you've got to see, is it causing a problem? Can it be tolerated? What's happening with the roadmap? What's your client's view? All of those things. So again, no, it's not about absolute answers. It's about, can you provide realistic, well-considered, proportionate, measured advice for the client in that building during their ownership?
Yeah, I think, yes, gypsum plaster is vapor permeable. Many materials are vapor permeable. I mean, even cement to a degree is vapor permeable. That doesn't mean to say it's not going to cause a problem in certain situations, because there are different degrees of vapor permeability or vapor openness. So it depends. I mean, the silly analogy I've sometimes used with people is, is a feather pillow, is that vapor permeable? Yes, it is. Well, would you like me to hold it over your face for a few minutes and see how well you can breathe then?
Yeah, I'm allergic to feathers as well. Nightmare.
Well, there you go. But it's a matter of, vapor permeability. There are degrees, but I think is exactly as you said, Peter, and I totally endorse what you said. Is there a problem? And if so, then what are we going to do about it? And in certain situations, are we actually going to cause more damage by trying to reverse what's already been done? There will come a time when you might have to do something. But if the damage isn't apparent now, so long as the client is aware of the future issues, and I think that comes back to the reporting side and dealing with clients, so long as the client is aware that this cement pointing, this gypsum plaster is not ideal in this situation, but it's not presently causing a problem. But that doesn't mean to say you can just forget about it forevermore. At some future date, there may be a point when you do have to address it. And I think that's really comes back to how do you deal with those situations, deal with those clients, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an answer. There is a question about the changes in lime plaster over the years. And all I'd say about that is, as materials from the Industrial Revolution, which, let's face it, was back in the 17th century, 17th, 18th century, Georgian period, we've had experimentation, innovation, and invention. And throughout that period, things have been changing. And of course, we get the Portland cement first invented, brought about in, I think it was 1824 or thereabouts. But then that's developed over the years as well. So if we were to look at, say, Portland cement from the 1830s and looked at Portland cement from today, we'd be looking at different materials, more or less. And it's the same with plasters, it's the same with mortars, and so on and so forth. It's developed. And that's why, and I think the key thing that I think we want to get across in our training is every building is going to be different. Even if you're dealing with a terrace of buildings, you're going to find something that's different in that building, whether it is what's been done to it, or even just because of the occupation of that building, the way it's occupied, there will be something different. And therefore, what we will emphasize in our training is it's very much understand the building, understand the scenario, the circumstances you're dealing with before you intervene. Understand before intervention. I think that's the key of what we're saying in all of this. Now, sorry, I've whittled on. I'm aware we've gone over time, and I think it's about appropriate that we start wrapping up now. So, Peter, have you got any final words of wisdom for us?
That's really your job on this, Stephen, I think. But good question. Just want to make sure that people are a little bit more aware about gravimetric analysis, which I've said, and the roadmap approach and the very sort of gentle investigation process, and not finding the answer straight away. That's really the point. And if people don't understand gravimetrics, they should, because it will tell you a lot. Because that answers so many questions in a way of, does this myth exist? Yes or no? Well, yeah, you can prove it.
Yeah. No, thank you. Ian, I've done all the talking in the last few minutes. So do you want to wrap up and finish for today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's my fault. 7 minutes over. Must do better. No, so I think I wrap things up very quickly, because thank you to everyone that's joined us today. I appreciate taking time out. It's never easy. Much busy schedules. So today counts as an hour formal CPD, so that's good. I think there's a link in the comments somewhere, hopefully, with a link to Module 1. Please go and check it out if you haven't already. It's well worth a look through. Gives you an intro into where we are today and where we go forward. It will give you a snippet into what we plan to do and our style in terms of the content. Module 2 is well underway. One of the questions very quickly, yes, we do plan to break out these sections, so it's very much a pick your own, focus on what you're keen and to know more on, and it's very flexible. So it's not a one size fits all. The training and moisture, we acknowledge all of these things. So so please do go and check that out. I think we'd like to do more of these in a bit more technical detail in forward, and obviously we'll be back to everybody as soon as we've got more for you. But yeah, thank you, Peter, for your time and help today.
Well, no, thanks for inviting me on. It's been a real pleasure.